Hello and welcome to New York City Atheists Live on Tape, brought to you by New York City Atheists Incorporated. I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. We're at one of our Sunday brunches, which are very popular. We always have great speakers and presentations, and that's one of the reasons why we have been on for 5 years, and we'll be going on more. So we want to ask the question, amongst others, have you ever wondered why Catholic priests are called father, nuns are called sister or mother, and the Pope is allegedly called the Holy Father of us all? It's called kin psychology, and according to our guest today, psychiatrist J. Anderson Thomson, Jr. of the University of Virginia, it's one way that the Church implicitly or explicitly generates the emotional attachment of his flock. Now, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Thomson for kind of a sit-down session of this show last spring at the American Atheist Convention in Atlanta. And I'll just give you a little background. Dr. Thomson has a private practice of general psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. He's going to have to explain forensic psychiatry to me. It sounds very interesting. Does this in Charlottesville, Virginia. And he serves as a staff psychiatrist at the University of Virginia Institute of Law, Psychiatry and Public Policy, and the Counseling and Psychological Services of the University of Virginia Student Health Services. He gave a talk also a couple of years ago at the Atheist Alliance International convention just outside of Washington, which I guess because it had the Four Horsemen, which included Dawkins, Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett. It was kind of considered the Woodstock of atheism. In any case, he's going to be talking to us about the psychology of religion. So let me introduce Andy Thomson.
What we see is, again, this is your right hemisphere, and we're looking at, so you're looking at my right brain, and that area on the medial side is where everything goes on that has to do with self-reference, introspection, focus on non-physical attributes of ourselves, our feelings, our wishes, our desires, emotional states, our traits, our preferences. And also in those areas, where we think about other people's emotional states and their intentions, beliefs, desires. It's all along that medial part. The lateral part, particularly behind the temporal lobe, parietal lobe out here, and lateral frontal cortex, this is where we think about physicality. This is where we recognize our own face, own body movements, another person's body movements. So you see that this mind-body split is built into the very structure of the brain. This Cartesian dualism is how the brain represents mind and body, mind and physicality. And so we believe minds and bodies are separate from the very beginning, despite evidence to the contrary. It's basically built into the way we think. To understand this further, let's flip it around for a minute. Think about if you required the presence of a body to think about that person's mind. That would mean that little exercise I asked you to do in terms of interacting and thinking about Obama, for us to think about what Obama thinks requires him to be here today. You can see where that wouldn't work very well. So a belief in some form of life separate from the body and separate from what's experienced in the body is really the default setting of the human mind. The mind-brain split. And so you can see that what religion is based on is just one little step away from everyday, ordinary cognitive operation that's absolutely crucial to our being social animals. Whoops, let's see. We see this again in children. 4-year-olds, more than half of 4-year-olds have imaginary friends. And it turns out the research shows that those children that have imaginary friends actually are more social, and in some sense do better. And then there's a fellow, Jesse Baring, who's done some just wonderful research. And I would strongly suggest looking at his article in American Scientist on this. I think it's June of 2006. I think what you want to keep your eye on, he has a book coming out, I think, this spring on religion, which I think will be tremendous. And he's done some incredible research, and one of them is the alligator and the mouse. And what this is he takes, and he tells the children, this is just a game, it's not serious, just a game, and he takes a grouchy alligator who eats a mouse puppet. It's a puppet show, and the grouchy alligator eats the mouse, and then he asks the children all sorts of questions. And he asks them, you know, does the mouse still taste his food from lunch? No. Does the mouse still need water? No. Does the mouse miss its mother? Oh yeah. Is the mouse still angry at his brother? Oh yeah. So you start to see that children make this split. And what's important about this is that the idea that we have to sort of learn culturally about the afterlife or those kind of beliefs is simply wrong. That actually children are more vulnerable to it. As children get a little bit older, they get a little bit more sophisticated in this, so that they'll no longer say that a mouse is thirsty. They don't need water, and they no longer have the thirst, whereas young children, they don't need water, but yes, they're thirsty. So they still impute mental states knowing that the animal is dead. So we will attribute mental states to those that are dead that we simply can't imagine living without. Let me tease it out a little bit further for you. I want you all to think about for a moment a friend of yours who died suddenly, say died suddenly of a heart attack or died suddenly in a car accident. If you can call that person to mind and think about him for a second, does that person know he or she is dead? Most of us on a gut level will say yeah. And that's what the research shows. Even if we are, in Baring's research, he even had one guy who was an atheist say, yeah, I'm an atheist, I know there's no afterlife now, and now George knows it. It is very hard, it's almost impossible for us to actually conceive of our own deaths, but even in terms of the mental state of others, it's very hard to conceive of their death and their not being either. So you can see that these supernatural beliefs hijack inferential systems that are already in place. Theory of mind. All of us have very sophisticated mechanisms for trying to infer the wishes, beliefs, and desires of other people. These cognitive adaptations come online when we're about 4 to 5 years of age. Steve Pinker thinks religion is really theory of mind run amok. I want you to look at the picture of Bogart on the left, focus on that for a moment, and then quickly look at the picture of Bogart on the right. Now, on the left, Bogart's eyes are looking to your right, right? On the left, Bogart's eyes are looking to your left. But wait a second, it's the same picture. Why is that? And what I'm trying to show you is that you're not even aware of it, but you have separate, dedicated mechanisms that watch eye gaze, that are purely dedicated to monitoring eye gaze. And I'll show you even further. Particularly the people in the back. Can they see the slide? I want you to look at this pair of eyes, then make a gut reaction as to what emotion the person is feeling. Anybody want to guess? Uneasy. That's right, uneasy. What about this one? Playful. Now, step back and think about it for a moment. You're looking at grainy black and white photos, and you are making accurate, sophisticated judgments about the internal emotional state of another person. And you can read about 412 different emotions from eye gaze alone. And guess what? The women do this better than the men. But we all do it pretty well. This work is by actually Sacha Baron Cohen's older brother, Simon Baron Cohen at Cambridge. Extraordinary work, and this is the essence of autism and Asperger's. You don't realize it, but you have these extraordinary mechanisms where you are trying to tease out. You can't see the other person's mind, but you're teasing out and trying to get clues as to what very sophisticated feeling states, intentions, and desires are. In the back, you probably can't see the caption here, but it says, "What do you think I think about what you think I think you've been thinking about?" And again, this is something that we all just take for granted, and it's called intentionality with an S. And what this means is something like this. I hope is the first order. I hope that you like my talk, the second order. You now know that I hope you like my talk, third order. And fourth order would be, you now know that he knows that I hope he likes my talk. Fourth order intentionality. We take this for granted, but it is crucial to social interaction. Can the people in the back read the captions? Okay, Ken. It says, "I think he's very boring." The woman says, "I think he's very boring." The one in the middle says, "I believe that she thinks I'm attractive." The husband over here says, "I suspect that he believes that she wants to run off with him." But you can see that this is absolutely crucial to how we negotiate social relationships. Religions easily hijack this. I believe that God wants. I believe that God wants us to act with righteous intent. And then fourth order, which is social religion, I want you to believe that God wants us to act with righteous intent. Children. Children are what are called causal determinists, intuitive theists, or promiscuous teleologists. And basically what this means, which we all share, is that we overread purpose. If you ask a child what a stone is for, they'll say it's to scratch, for animals to scratch themselves. What's a lake for? For birds to land on, for fish to swim in. We wildly overread purpose. If you go to the Richard Dawkins website, there's an interview with Randy Nesse, and Richard Dawkins and Randy Nesse are talking about natural selection. They both keep catching themselves using intentional language to talk about natural selection. And so it's very hard for us to get our minds around things like natural selection that are purposeless and driven without clear design intentions. This is why it makes it very easy for us to believe creationist accounts of the world. And children, regardless of what their parents' beliefs are, will give you a creationist account of the world, generally between the age of, I think it's 8 and 12. Again, because we overread this kind of determinate view. Children will spontaneously invent the concept of God without any prompting. And so what all this tells us, I think, is that, again, we're natural-born supernaturalists, that these cognitive adaptations, which are crucial for survival, crucial for social interaction, which are the foundation in many respects of what make us humans, these adaptations are easily come together to generate religious ideas. Now, the attachment system I mentioned earlier, John Bowlby, the English psychiatrist, Mary Ainsworth, the clinical psychologist in this country, delineated it in humans. It's the basic caretaking system in all mammals. And there's the great paleoanthropologist Alan Walker. They've got a fossil, 1.7 million years old, of a Homo erectus woman. And she died of vitamin A poisoning, which would have been a horrible death. Bleeding into your joints, immobile, great pain. And they see under the microscope that she had already started to calcify which indicated that she lived for weeks or months. And what it meant is that people were taking care of this woman on the savannas, protecting her from predators. So we see in our ancestors the attachment mechanism. The attachment mechanism is crucial to religion, but what I'll show you, it is also crucial to the difficulty of giving up religion. And we see that illustrated tremendously in Darwin's life. If you look at Darwin's life, if you remember the voyage of the Beagle, 1831 to 1836, and he went on the voyage as a creationist. And he got home in December of 1836. By the spring of 1837, John Gould, the ornithologist, is telling him, these birds, these finches, are unknown. These are separate species, unknown to ornithology. And he had already been thinking, from what he had gathered on his voyage, that the immutability of species was not correct. He opened his notebooks in the summer of 1837. This is where he first drew out a tree of life. And he realized that creatures evolved and changed over time. He still didn't have a mechanism. In September of 1838, he read Malthus's essay. He had his mechanism, the struggle for survival. And somewhere then, in that fall of 1838, he told his fiancée, his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, and that he in a sense, had the secret of life. And she wrote him back this. And for those, can you read it in the back? Okay. That she was very distressed by this. She was a believer. And it caused enormous tension between them. And it may have been one of the factors that had him delay publication for over 20 years. He had it figured out in the fall of 1838. He sat on the idea for 20 years. On the bottom of it, when I am dead, know that many times I have kissed and cried over this letter. And this was found after his death. And so she was very distressed at what he had figured out. By the 1840s, they'd had their family, and on Sundays they would walk to church. Emma and the children would go into the church. Charles would walk on down the path. And we see it today. Some of you may be familiar with Carl Giberson, one of the physicists, a right-wing Christian, and who's written about the melding of evolution and Christianity. And he states this explicitly in his book. And I think you see it as explicitly as you will anywhere, the fear of loss, of rupture of attachment bonds if you give up your faith. He felt he would lose his wife, his in-laws, his children. Those are just some of the mechanisms. Decoupled cognition, inferential reasoning, theory of mind, the attachment system. What I now want to show you is just some of the empirical evidence. What I think is extraordinary about this is that this study came out this spring, and it comes from the National Institute of Health. It comes from the National Institute of Stroke and Neurovascular Disease. And what they did is they did functional MRIs, and they took a group of people, 20 males, 20 females, various religious beliefs, put them in functional MRIs, and read them series of statements, and then you would answer yes or no. And functional MRI would measure what areas of your brain lit up. And it would be things like, religion has moral systems, Jesus was real, God disapproves of abortion. Various very conservative statements to very liberal statements, but all sorts of religious statements. And what they found was that the brain lit up in specific areas around specific issues, and basically four areas. God's level of involvement, God's love and God's anger, what they call doctrinal religious knowledge, meaning things that you had learned, experiential religious knowledge. What is important about this study is that it localized religious belief in the areas of the brain that process theory of mind and abstract reasoning, imagery, semantics. Again, known areas of the brain that serve other purposes, that are crucial for other purposes. And it demonstrated that again, religious beliefs were only in these well-known circuits that were used for other purposes, other cognitive adaptations. When they broke down their data and looked at religious versus non-religious individuals, there's no difference in the basic parameters. And what's important about this study is that it is clear that religious ideas are integrated into brain networks that already exist, known brain networks for social cognition. They're not separate, God modules in the brain. And this is some of the first and I think most powerful evidence we have that supports the idea that religious belief occurs in everyday evolved cognitive adaptations. Some of you may have seen that Sam Harris of the End of Faith and Letter to a Christian Nation fame. Many of you may not realize Sam Harris is a neuroscientist, and he's just published a study, again, looking at, in his case, the difference in belief and non-belief. They were looking at very religious Christians and very clear non-believers. And they were, again, very simple statements. The devil exists, elephants exist, and looking at the difference. And what they found, which surprised them, was that religious belief turned out to, again, be in that medial prefrontal cortex area of the brain. Independent of content, that what lit up in believers were the areas of the brain that had to do with self-representation, self-identity. Again, known areas of the brain that have to do with how we negotiate social relationships. Absolutely independent of content. This just came out. It's online. It is well written. I encourage you to look at it. One of the other things that goes on is what is called the problem of dead bodies. And in a sense, I've already alluded to this, but when we're confronted with a dead body, we have a conflict. We have a conflict between our natural kind modules, the areas of our brain that know that an animal is dead or alive, animate or inanimate, versus theory of mind, which never shuts off, which is that in that body is a mind which is still active, which is still going on, which has, wishes, beliefs, desires. And one of the solutions to that problem is, of course, an afterlife and a soul. But we are, as I hope I've shown you by now, we are very predisposed towards, it doesn't take much to think, that life continues. I don't know about you, but I'm getting to the age where a lot of the people near and dear to me have died. I catch myself talking to them. And I suspect all of you here have done that at some point. And that's the reason. Our theory of mind modules just simply don't ever shut off. Now, if I raise my hand, my right hand, the left motor strip of my brain is activated. All of you who are watching me raise my right hand, the same area of your brain is lighting up right now. The same area of your brain that would light up if you raised your right hand. But part of your frontal lobe is inhibiting that, and so you don't raise your right hand. Some of you may have heard of this. This is mirror neurons. And this is a Filipino devotee who had himself crucified a couple of years ago. And the mirror neurons are important. If I take this knife and I start to put it into my left hand, I'm starting to feel pain right now. And I'm starting to feel pain in my right thalamus, the right sensory strip of my lateral cortex right here. Remember, the area that has to do with physical representation, that lateral cortex. And I'm starting to feel pain. And if you all are watching me stick this knife into my hand, that same area of your brain is lighting up too. You are at some level feeling my pain. This is crucial because what it tells us is that we literally empathize at a neurophysiologic level with other individuals. And the idea that we need religion for empathy and ethics is simply wrong. We literally feel other people's pain. It's crucial to our social interaction. And one of the things that interests me about this is that, of course, I grew up inculcated in the Christian faith, and I remember always being upset when I saw this kind of stuff. And now I know why. Because at some level, no matter how inured you get to this, at some level you see this kind of stuff and it generates pain. You feel it at some level. And this is then utilized, I think, quite effectively by religions to help engender obligation, empathy, the things that come from it. Guilt. If somebody's suffering, I can really easily feel guilt. When you look at this man, what do you feel? I don't know about you, but to me, he's a kindly older brother. And what this illustrates is how a phenomenon that was first described by Sigmund Freud is utilized in religion, and this is the phenomenon of transference, that we base present relationships on past relationships. That we learn the grammar of relatedness in our early relationships and we bring them into our present relationships. If you saw the movie Memento, remember the guy has to learn about relationships each new time. And you can see how religions hijack capacity for transference. If the Pope is the Holy Father, I'm going to relate to him at some level like my own father. Just to give you some idea of some of the other mechanisms that are involved, childhood credulity. Natural selection designed childhood brains to soak up the culture of their surrounding, the social culture of their surrounding. Deference to authority. All of us are much more deferential to authority than any of us would like to believe. How many of you here are familiar with the Stanley Milgram experiments? If you're not, look them up. He showed that he's the one that had people give electric shocks to individuals under order, and people would give what they even knew were lethal shocks to subjects. Obviously they weren't actually lethal shocks, but it was an extraordinary experiment. Again, but being deferential to authority had survival value in the harsh, dangerous environments we evolved in.